And I'm a sociology major, and I am doing my project on the social construction of autism in both Canada and Russia. And I chose these two countries because Canadians, they are up and coming with what they're doing with autism, with their awareness and their implementation, and Russians are another interesting choice because of the fact that they're the ones that are just becoming aware of autism, and it's interesting to see how they construct it and the roots and the origins of how they construct it. Now, the research questions I'm focusing on, in order to understand the sociocultural environment and how it creates very different outcomes for each autistic individual in both countries, you have to understand the origins of the social construction of autism in both Russia and Canada. Then you have to understand, too, the social cultural environments, how are they created, and how is it that they create very different outcomes for the population in both nations. And finally, how does the social construction of autism contribute to the well-being and the overall quality of life of those who are on the autism spectrum. Autism is defined by the Diagnostic Statistical Manual as a broad spectrum of pervasive developmental disorders encompassing all social skills deficits, communication skills, and motor skills deficits. And autism ranges from a spectrum of lower functioning to higher functioning. And beginning with the lower functioning end of the spectrum, you have childhood disintegrative disorder, which is characterized by loss of skills, motor skills, speech skills rapidly after the age of 2, and sometimes it's mistaken for mental retardation. And you have Rett syndrome, which is very frequent and highly diagnosed in females. And this usually occurs at the age of 2 years old, and it's associated with the deceleration of the growth of the brain and loss of meaningful motor skills, loss of the ability to relate and form relationships. And sometimes the child themselves understands, they realize what's going on even at such a young age of 2 years old, and they're sometimes really surprised at what's happening. Classical autism is characterized with stereotypical behaviors such as repetitive behaviors. Sometimes there's obsessive interests, and sometimes there's learning deficits, or even just a different way of learning. And there's mild general autism, which encompasses pretty much the same as classical autism, except there's somewhat of a dysfunction with motor skills, and then there's more trouble with social skills and relating to peers and understanding social cues, nonverbal cues, and generally it is milder than what would be considered classic autism. The highest functioning being Asperger's syndrome, with mainly just encompassing all social skills deficits, even though there are presently motor skills deficits and communication problems as well. But it mostly affects those who have trouble relating to people socially. Russians institutionalize more than half of their children that are disabled. Close to half of the kids that are disabled are institutionalized. And in Canada, only about 14% of the children that are disabled or institutionalized, and it's all due in part to the fact that Russians don't really recognize the developmental disabilities. And statistically, it's said that 1 in 147 children in Canada are diagnosed with autism. But roughly, the disability statistics are roughly the same worldwide. But I will be explaining how these statistics actually come about through the way that they're constructed and the way that disability is recognized and diagnosed. Now I'm going to discuss two of the major terms that will be threaded throughout this project. One of the major aspects of the way that they see autism comes in the form of medicalization, which is what happens when you take normal developments or normal human everyday problems and you take them and you treat them and you define them as if they're medical problems. And then deviance happens when you're not conforming to what is considered normal to society or what is agreed upon as being valuable to society. Russians and Canadians both have their ways of conceptualizing disability, especially autism, as being deviant. Russians conceptualize autism as being deviant in the way that they employ something called a deficit model, which the psychologists actually say that deficit models is a view in which you view a disability or a medical issue as something that's a deficit and it can't be fixed, it can't be cured, and it's just a deficit. And adults exhibiting, in their case, adults exhibiting autism are very frequently diagnosed as schizophrenic. And this is because Russians, they don't recognize the fact that there are a variety of developmental disabilities, and the diagnostic criteria that the Russians are using actually relies on an older, outdated diagnostic criteria, which makes the symptoms appear very similar to schizophrenia symptoms. And because of all of this, they're much more likely to institutionalize those on the autism spectrum. And this is all due in part to the lack of knowledge overall in comparison to other societies in the medical field of autism-related issues. Canada, on the other hand, employs a difference model, in which case they view disability as not only a set of deficits, but as possibly a difference in how to communicate with them and how you should accommodate and accept this difference. There's generally a greater awareness of the autism spectrum disorders, and they're less likely, because of that, to institutionalize autistic individuals, hence the statistics that I showed previously in comparison to Russia. And generally, medical professionals, they don't rely too much on the medical profession for definitions and how to handle autism. They collaborate and invite perspectives from the educational field, the political policymakers, and social fields to collaborate and understand and work together to collaborate with each other on how to deal with autism. And the theoretical foundations, it really happens all in all with social attitudes toward autism as a spectrum. Russians generally, because the fact that they hold anyone who is disabled or abnormal in any way, they consider them to be unnatural, therefore they consider them to need exclusion. And the reason that they really don't recognize disabilities, especially developmental disabilities, is because only observable defects are the ones that get recognized as being disabled and needing accommodation. Canadians, on the other hand, are much more willing to consider accommodations for those with autism. They're much more willing to provide health care initiatives, policies implemented. In fact, Canada is making it mandatory for all health insurances to provide services for families with autism. they view disability with much less stigma. It's much less stigmatized in Canada. And generally they recognize autism as a spectrum, whereas Russia, on the other hand, just recognizes it as a set of deficits that is very static. And generally the suggestions for improving the social attitudes really lies in education on both parts. First of all, Russians could do to redefine their conceptions of deviance, and what I'm saying is that they really shouldn't apply deviance to medical problems, especially disabilities, developmental disabilities. They really should not do that to medical problems. What they should do is focus on more of a difference model by increasing medical knowledge within the field. And then they really should understand autism, the differences, the advantages, sometimes how to treat the symptoms. And Canadians could do better to expand their current views in the Act for Autism as a Spectrum. And then they should also educate the population more often for autism as a spectrum. And another thing they could do is implement a wider variety of social groups and autism rights and autism acceptance movements. So in the future, if they keep progressing, this is what I see will need to happen. Autism overall is gaining more acceptance and recognition overall over the world. And social attitudes within autism can be changed through education and understanding. And generally the Russians should rely on a more updated diagnostic criteria and not really rely on the outdated material, because that will be hurting the individuals in the long run. Canadians generally demonstrate a more open understanding of autism. However, they would benefit from a greater societal awareness, as well as much more activism involved. And generally, my argument with this thesis, this project of mine, I'm really trying to say that the quality of life for those with the autism spectrum disorder really just depends on the lens in which you view autism, or any disability for that matter. It really just depends on the view, and that affects the way society sees it, the way people respond to it, and overall, the life that we lead. My personal interest in autism and both Canada and Russia stems from the fact that I myself was diagnosed with classical autism at the age of 2 years old. And I have experienced going through various educational institutions, therapies, social skills, intervention. And I've seen growing up, living my life through autism, I've seen some of what can happen, like the fact that you can succeed if you're given the opportunities and the chance to succeed, and you're given the appropriate services and accommodations. And also, I believe that acceptance and awareness really has helped me to get what I needed as a person with autism. And I myself have been involved with autism rights movements, autism acceptance movements. I'm actually a member of a group, I'm one of the student leaders of a group on campus called Students Can Advocate Together. And this is basically a student advocacy group for those with disabilities. And all I'm really saying is that if only everyone around the world was able to get the opportunities that I've had, that I've been blessed to receive, then those with autism could live above and beyond their potential.
I'm going to go You're good. Coming in.